Media in Society. We are continuing to talk about early film. This is part two of the film segment. So let's talk about the really movement toward the evolution of motion picture technology. Numerous people were involved in this development. George Eastman of Eastman Kodak fame, who's standing up there on the left, develops the film side, the celluloid that I mentioned last time. Thomas Edison, there he is again. We know him for developing the first successful light bulb, and I've been talking about how he developed the phonograph. But he's a shrewd businessman. He's got this great lab, great bunch of engineers and technologists working for him, and he's really good at commercialization as well, because you can really have the greatest product in the world, but without demand, it's absolutely worthless. At least to the world, right? So let's look at some of the early movies that his group was putting together, and it's essentially putting photography. That's kind of what I want to say about that. Um, we think about the kind of films that we see today, and in the beginning, it was just to see things moving, to put things into motion. So let's roll this. I think we're going to roll this. It's being a little slow. Things like An Athlete with Wand from 1894, Sandow the Strongman, same year, Carmencita the Dancer, and dancing was a really popular topic back then. Professor Welton's Boxing Cats, and if you hold cats up to each other, they'll kind of box each other. A guy named Caicedo with pole. Now, if you're a slackliner, you got to be impressed with this. And then they really enjoyed putting animals together that would fight, and this one's called, coming up here, Cockfight number 2. So dogs, chickens, you name it, they'll have them fight. They were really interested in Native Americans. This is called Buffalo Dance, an authentic Native American dance, we think. But also they were very fascinated with what's happening out here in the West, and this is a bucking bronco at the rodeo. Got some video or film here of Annie Oakley, the famous shooter, Imperial Japanese dancers. Again, we're thinking it's authentic. A fire rescue scene. I would assume this is kind of set up. The execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. Now, keep in mind this is staged. Mary was executed actually in 1587. In early sexuality, which I'll talk about a little bit later, it's something called the kiss. So we see a lot of kissing and making out and things like that. This one's called Mess Call. This is just soldiers, probably in a place like Fort Collins, just getting their dinner. People wanted to see what that was like, just mugging for the camera. But soon people wanted more. They wanted narratives. They wanted theatrical type stories. And so I think I'm a little ahead of myself. I'm going to jump ahead here. Here's Charlie Chaplin. And he's in a movie. Actually, this is a little bit of a later movie, but it's modern times. But it's a really nice example of the kind of thing that people wanted. And so Charlie Chaplin, big screen star, a little guy, and he's always kind of getting in trouble with the big guy and or the boss. And there's the boss. And he could never keep up with what was expected of him, essentially. And that's really the big part of the story. That's the problem that he suffers. And generally things start to go wrong, and he ends up, I guess I won't go on too far with this, but he ends up getting caught in the machinery of the factory. And I do want to show you this because it's kind of great to see. Can you imagine trying to pull this off? And in the end, he wins, he beats the boss, and he usually gets the girl. That's kind of the way that story goes. So that's the kind of thing that people wanted. And a good example of that was in 1903, the Great Train Robbery. This was really the first of all, popular Western. It was actually longer. It was 12 minutes long, which doesn't seem long, but that was quite a long time for back then. Creative editing, which I'll discuss here in a second. It has a story as a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end. And I believe I've got, yeah, there it is. Let me just show you some of the editing techniques that they're doing. I'm a video guy, so I teach this stuff. So again, you're seeing something that looks essentially like a theatrical play that's shot, and we're the fourth wall. And but they started to, like, go to a different shot. You see this? That's a medium shot, and that was a wide shot. And this is kind of a medium shot. And they're editing these things together, so they're sequentially putting things together, this story and this narrative. And it doesn't seem like much, but it really is. And they even had a couple of close-ups and things like that. So this is all kind of new, kind of a good death scene there. A little corny, but it worked. Different shot there. And people ate this up. They loved this. Okay. So let's kind of talk about production. Edison is developing his movie technology and his production side around the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, and it was mostly in the Northeast. Some of the movies you saw were produced at what he called Black Maria. That's what you see up there in the upper right. It's his studio in New Jersey. And it was called Black Maria because it was all black. I mean, it was covered with tar paper. Can you imagine how hot it was inside of there? And they would actually, you can kind of barely see the track that it would rotate on. And the thing would actually spin around. And then the studio where they would shoot was in here. And they could open up the top, the lid, this huge lid here. And then they would do that so they could follow the movement of the sun. So as the sun moves around, they're moving around. So they're getting the best light possible. Really amazing. And it was named after, I believe, the paddy wagons of the time in New York City that were very cramped. They were really stuffy, and they had a similar black pattern. Paddy wagon being a horse-driven wagon that would carry away drunk people and criminals and stuff like that off to jail. And so really kind of an interesting thing. Now, once they got the production side down, then they really had to work on distribution. Many of the movies end up in early theaters called Nickelodeons, which were popular around 1900, and they cost a nickel, as you would imagine, per movie. So a nickel back then was worth about $1.32 today, maybe a little more than that. And so really this develops around this desire to see stories on a movie screen. And so this literally a factory studio system develops to provide these movies. And it wasn't long before in this country, the average person is attending a movie once a week. Really, again, a good question for your grandparents and even your great-grandparents is to ask them about their movie attendance as a kid. So after some false starts in the Northeast, film production develops in Southern California, specifically Hollywood, as we know today. And why is that? Well, because Edison is a tough cookie. He tries to control all production of technology in movies. And so his competitors, they flee as far away to the opposite corner of the country, which at that time was quite remote. It's away from prying eyes of authorities and attorneys especially. Also, as we know, there's really nice weather for filming. And then in the 1910s, the studio system develops. And this is a system where there was like a factory and they could just churn out movies. They had all the people who could make the movies. They had all the supplies. They had all the knowledge, and they had the actors and things like that. And in the 1920s, a true star system is established where you'd have a movie that was not just a movie about a topic. It was a movie that it was based on Charlie Chaplin. So you don't care what the movie's about. You go to see Charlie Chaplin. And soon we move from quaint, kind of simple Nickelodeons to the true movie palaces that really eclipse anything we have today. These are large urban theaters, very plush furnishings. And imagine this, air conditioning. Even back in the 1920s, 1930s, air conditioning. No one had AC. So what'd you do on a Saturday night? You'd go to the movies because it was cooler. Now, as far as the development of movies, the next big step, from that early Western I told you about, was something called Birth of a Nation in 1915. This is the first epic film by D.W. Griffith. It's an American sort of biograph, 3 hours long, focuses on the Civil War and Reconstruction, and known for racial stereotyping. In a way, terrible, but in a way also bringing up some stuff that people generally didn't talk about publicly out in the open. So some scholars think it was kind of a good thing. Though the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, they protest. And let me just roll a clip from the movie. I think it'll work right here. So in the first half of the movie, it follows the Civil War era history pretty closely, recounting activities in and around the Great War. And what's interesting is when you watch the battle scenes, actually, a lot of the movie seems kind of quaint and old-fashioned. but the fighting is quite intense, as you can see there. I mean, it really looks like people are being bayoneted and shot and clubbed over the head, and it's just, I was amazed when I saw it. Now that part really doesn't bother people because, like I say, it really does kind of follow true to the history. But the part that made many people extremely uncomfortable was the second half of the movie. We'll try to get there here in a second. Let's see how close we are. Yeah, we're almost there. Let's try this. Let me go to this one. I think I can just advance it. Let's just get up to this kind of some clips from the second half of the movie. There we are. Okay, I'm going to start it right there, and we are going to push play. Because in the second half of the movie, they really focus on a character by the name of Gus, who's depicted as African American, but he's actually a Euro-American, a white actor playing in blackface. And so he was supposed to represent a Union soldier who had, fought for the North, African American, comes back and wants to then marry a young white woman in the South. And she's upset, everyone down there acts upset. This brings out the Ku Klux Klan, the white supremacist group, who sets out to kill Gus and sort of rid the area of these former Union soldiers who happen to also be African American. And the Ku Klux Klan is presented as restoring order in the South. And so the KKK is given a heroic identity, which didn't sit very well with a lot of people. And what's interesting is that to this day, the Ku Klux Klan uses this film as a form of propaganda to present itself as being something more positive. So quite a bit of criticism of the way that it stereotyped African Americans and really celebrated the KKK. But I want to add that some saw it as helping to launch a small African American film industry. And so let me... Okay, so examples of early black film, and that's what they called it back then, were Noble and George Johnson, who were known for portraying everyday life in that genre of film. Also someone by the name of Emmett Scott. He's a scholar, he's a film pioneer, he's known for a film Birth of a Race, kind of a takeoff on Birth of a Nation. He is a financial failure, which often happened with these early passionate artists. But he did inspire similar filmmakers and films that followed, including the work of Oscar Micheaux, who was much more successful. He's an author, he's a film pioneer. He was famous for a movie by the name of Within Our Gates. He made 44 films between 1919 and 1948. And I'm going to show you a clip or two here from Micheaux's something. It's a film called Lying Lips from 1939. And a nightclub singer refuses to date customers, so she's framed for the murder of her aunt somehow, and convicted of killing and then sent to prison. However, her friend, who's a police detective, doesn't believe that she did it and sets out to prove her innocence. And bottom line, mostly African-American casts in these films, and that's not something that you saw in white films, Euro-American based films. And so this gave them an opportunity to appear in these films, and also, for their audiences, it was something they could identify with. Let's take a look.
Beautiful baby for me?
Sure thing, Elsie. Let's go.
You must have been a beautiful baby. Why, you must have been a wonderful child. When you were only starting to go to kindergarten, I'll bet you drove the little boys wild.
This is all over YouTube now, which is just fantastic, and other services. Probably Vimeo. So if you get a chance, check out these different. There's a black film industry. There's a Hispanic film industry. There's Asian. There's just think of all the diversity of the United States, and it's out there, and now it's more available for people to see. In the 1920s, that's considered to be the heyday of what we call silent pictures. So really more complex storylines. Foreign actors were common because they didn't need to speak English, or it was okay if they had an accent, not a big deal at that time. Really adult themes, and they can often be quite risque. They do continue to use title slides to emphasize critical points in the plot to move it along. And they're continuing to be accompanied by piano, organ, and other musical ensembles. And they were promoted through movie magazines, which was an early form of publicity. Okay, so next time we'll start off by discussing the impact of sound in movies.